have seen the news from the Energy Ministry today that it made a mistake in calculating the petrol price. The price went up by 81 cents a litre overnight. It should only have gone up by 75 cents a litre. From what we understand, it seems the problem came when calculating the price because an official inserted an increase for petrol pump attendants. Their salaries come out of the price, but that increase had already been included in the price. I think it was in September. Professor Sampson Mamphweli is the director of the Centre for Renewable and Sustainable Energy. Duvenage runs the organisation Undoing Tax Abuse. Gentlemen, good afternoon to you both. Wayne, let me start with you. I mean, this is an incredibly embarrassing mistake by the department. It does raise questions about the capacity of the Energy Ministry.
Yeah, it certainly does. And you start to wonder, well, how many other mistakes have been made? We looked at this retail margin, and it does have inconsistencies in when it does go up during the year. Most of the other taxes go up in the start of the tax year in March, but this one is related to petrol pump employees, and there's a couple of components therein. We need to get to the bottom of how does a mistake like this happen? You shouldn't be making mistakes of this nature. It's very costly to society. And secondly, how do we prevent this going forward? And is there anything else that's wrong in these spreadsheets?
I mean, Wayne, the problem with this is I don't know where the extra 6 cents goes now. Now, say, for example, by 9 o'clock in the morning, your average minibus taxis possibly filled up at least once, maybe twice by then. That may just be, say 100 rands worth of, say 6 rands worth of petrol, if it's quite a lot of petrol, 1,000 rand worth, whatever it is. But either way, that does mean that we don't actually know where this money is now. There's money floating through the system somewhere.
Well, I think it will go to the to Treasury, and the easiest way to correct this is to allow it to run, because petrol pump attendants of petrol stations have set the prices, and it's already been running. So you'd run it for the month, and then you would correct it next month, but put a further correction in for another month to claw back, so society can claw back that overcharge for this month, and then go back to what it should be in February.
Professor Mamphweli. All right. I mean, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Professor Mamphweli, I mean, this is the kind of mistake that's very difficult to fix. There's Wayne's suggestion. I think it's a sensible suggestion. There may be others. But we also trust this department to get things right. It has to make big policy decisions, scientific decisions, decisions that have a big impact on our country.
Good evening, Stephen and Wayne and the viewers. Yes, it's a costly mistake on the side of the consumers. Most people don't have that kind of money as things stand. The department is supposed to have checks and balances in place, in my view, especially when they deal with issues of this nature. The calculations are done, as I understand it, by the Central Energy Fund. And before the department makes the announcement, in my view, they are supposed to have at least a number of people checking the correctness or other ways of the figures that they are putting out there. Because if you look at 6 cents per litre, Stephen, if someone filled a tank, a 50-litre tank, in the morning after that announcement, that person has parted ways with about 300 rands. That's a lot of money under the current economic situation. So for me, it's something that that warrants a thorough investigation and maybe some sanctions on the side of some people who may have made this mistake. Yes, it gets corrected at a later stage, and it's quite easy to make those corrections, but the effect on the consumers is being felt immediately.
Professor, I'm not an expert on the petrol price or the formula or maths, but my first thought would be that every single person who was involved in the calculation for this month and actually approved the insertion of the increase for petrol pump attendants was not involved in the calculation in September. And I mean, that talks about experience, it talks about, I mean, maybe there was a leave rotation or something, but anyone who'd been involved in the calculation in September would have raised the alarm if they'd been involved in determining this price calculation.
Yeah, I would like to think so, but looking at the way the departments are structured and the way the Central Energy Fund itself is structured, in most cases you would find that it's the same kind of faces that are involved in this value chain, in this kind of calculation. So I would like to think that it's the same people who were involved in September. Somewhere, somehow, something went wrong, and some people did not do their work in terms of the checks and balances. And I think a thorough and proper investigation needs to take place so that they can then establish who was basically, to use the layman's language, sleeping on the job. Because somebody slept on the job. By the time those figures get to the minister, they go through a whole lot of people until they get to the DG, who then passes them over to the minister for announcement to the general public. So somebody somewhere, somehow, was sleeping in the job this time.
Wayne Duvenage, there's a much bigger question around the petrol price. Generally, there's been a lot of discussion about this. The formula that we use goes back, well, a very long time now. You suggested it should be changed, and if I understand correctly, you've actually written to the finance minister about it.
Yes, well, we've actually written to him about these incessant increases, these continuous year-on-year above inflation increases to the various levies, and even this retail margin levy, which should be questioning all the increases. And they've added up over the last 10 years to combine all these levies. There's 12 different elements before you add in the actual price of the petrol. And they add up to 10 Rand, over 10 Rand a litre now. That was 4 Rand something 10 years ago. So before we even start with the petrol fluctuations and the Rand weaknesses, we paid 10 Rand with all these levies. And we're asking the minister, in this next budget session in February, do not increase these levies, because they've been increased far too high in the past. That is accumulated into a costly situation. And that's why we have this 20 Rand per litre when we have a weak Rand and oil prices. So, yeah, we've got to start engaging with the minister, and hopefully they engage with society to find a way to fix this problem.
I mean, Professor, we could try and change the petrol price. I mean, we want to change it all we like. In the end, the oil comes from a place that's not here. Unless we use coal through Sasol, we have to pay for it in dollars. The taxes that are on it and the sort of charges that are on it, at each point, that charge would have been put in for a certain reason, the road accident fund, road levy, whatever it is. If we take it out, that money has to come from somewhere. I mean, this is actually a classic governance problem in a way, that if we were going to make changes, we should make incremental changes over time. And because we haven't, Professor, this is where we are now? Have I understood it accurately?
Yes, you understand it quite well. There's quite a number of external factors, especially the Rand-dollar exchange because of the imports. The lending price, which is one of the 4 main aspects that are taken into consideration when we look at the fuel price. And the taxes are not helping because they just make matters worse, in my view. For me, we need to start also looking at alternatives to say, what are the alternatives to this? Especially do we have alternatives to the taxes or to some of them for that matter? Do we have alternatives in terms of what else we can use? At some point, I think it was sometime in 2019 or so, Cabinet approved the biofuels strategy, for instance, that calls for the blending of ethanol in some of the fuels. But that has not taken effect because we still don't have, there's still a number of aspects that need to be considered. We still don't have big biofuels projects in the country that can feed into that kind of a system. So that needs to be looked at, especially with some of these subsidies that are coming from these taxes that we are paying. We can actually look at subsidizing some of these kind of things so that the price of fuel can, in a long run, come down. We have the electric vehicle market that we need to stimulate. For instance, electric vehicles are much more efficient in terms of conversion from the electricity to the motor. So it becomes a bit cheaper to drive an electric vehicle, but they're still expensive because Most of them are still coming now. They're very new, and most of them are being made overseas. So we need to look at the industry in its totality and look at how do we then start now to attract investment into the electric vehicle industry, for instance, where we can have some of these electric vehicles made here in South Africa, where they can be a bit cheaper than the imports that we're supposed to do, or the imports that we are doing. So I think that we need to put our heads together and look at various aspects instead of just saying we accept this is the current situation, it's going to continue forever. We need to start looking at what are the alternatives, what is it that we can do, where can we cut in terms of these levies that are so high. I mean, for me, when we get to a certain situation, we should be saying, if the lending price increases, the tax must decrease. You know, just to cover up for some of this kind of things. And I think, Wayne, when you engage people like the minister, you need to be looking at those kind of creative manners in which they can make life easier for the motorists and the economy in general, because this price is going to be passed on to consumers of the various goods that are being transported using the fuel.
Professor Sampson Mamphweli, thank you, Director at the Centre for Renewable and Sustainable Energy at the University of Stellenbosch. Wayne Duvenage from the organisation Undoing Tax Abuse. I do appreciate the time. Thanks very much indeed.